Everybody, it's Pandy and I'm playing World of Tanks. I'm going to be talking about the Panzer IV. Now, at least in my eyes, the Panzer IV was one of the most famous German tanks in the Second World War. And this is not famous for its ability to deflect rounds like a Baus or outgun everyone like a fucking murderer or anything else. It was the backbone of the German war machine. It was one of those tanks that you are more than likely going to be running into because only 1 out of 4 of the German tanks that was ever produced was a Panzer IV. If I had it my way, I would have improved upon the design by giving it sloped armor, a better engine, and more improved guns, but that's just me. That's how I would have rolled it. A little bit about this tank. The Panzer IV was designed with the intent of being a support tank for the infantry against anti-tank ditches and also fortifications. The Panzer IV started out to be armed with a short-barreled 75mm howitzer as its main gun to achieve these goals and intentions. However, the gun never really fared well against heavier armored tanks purely because of its low penetration value. Overall development didn't see any major issues and testing went pretty flawlessly, so it went into mass production in 1936. The first production model came out with the main gun being the 75mm 37 L24 low velocity howitzer. Now the OS-A version was only protected with 14mm of frontal hull armor with 20mm of turret armor. The armor itself was only capable of stopping artillery fragments, small arms, and small caliber AT rounds. Only 35 of these made, and when 1937 rolled out, the OS-B was thrown into production. Now when talking about the OS-B, C, D, E, and F, they were all basically the same. Each version will basically see more armor plates added to the hull or thicker armor straight from the factory. The biggest and largest amount of changes that were done to any version was after the invasion of Poland. With that invasion, production was ramped up because they saw how the Panzer IV effectively acted within the field, and it was pretty damn good at its job for supporting the infantry and blowing shit up. The most notable change was to the E series of tanks, where the tracks were widened for better ground pressure for its tracks, allowing it to have better off-road performance. In May 1941, weeks before the invasion of the Soviet Union, Hitler wanted to improve upon the main armament of the Panzer IV. It was intended to have a 50mm anti-tank gun to replace that 75mm howitzer to give it a more anti-tank kick, but due to some shocking encounters with the KV-1 and the T-34, a much more powerful tank gun was voiced amongst the German army officers in November 1941. It was then decided to go ahead and drop the 50mm Panzer IV upgrade and go ahead and push for a 75mm anti-tank design. While it was understood that the 75mm Pak 40 L46 was more powerful and more effective to counter the German armored threats, the recoil from the gun would have pushed too much stress onto the hull and the turret of the Panzer IV, and there was simply not enough space within the turret to house this gun. So a shortened version called the 75 Pak 40 L43 found its way to the Panzer IVs with an L-shaped muzzle brake. Now the OS-F versions were retrofitted and or produced with the 75 Pak 43, and they were classified as the OS-F2s. After some other modifications to this version, they were renamed to the OS-G. Now another armor increase was seen onto the Panzer IVs when they went to the OS-G version, and now they had 80mm of frontal armor. Now these armor plates that were included and attached to these tanks was 30mm more thicker, which was very favorable by the troops in the field. It was then decided to go ahead and make all Panzer IVs built and produced with 80mm of frontal armor to simplify production. Now the technical problems related to having the extra weight put onto the front basically required a better suspension system, which came about in simple and easy modifications. Now also to allow for better manufacturing and production, the vision ports on the sides of the turret were removed. There was also improvements done to the engine's ventilation for better cooling during the summer fighting, and also during the winter the heat from the engine coolant kept the fuel injectors warm. Late model OS-Gs also saw that the 75mm Pak L43 was replaced with the Pak 40 L48, which was redesigned with a better muzzle brake to allow for better recoil efficiency and to disallow too much stress onto the turret itself. The OS-H version saw additional turret skirts and side skirts as standard issue when the tank was produced to protect it from anti-tank rockets and smaller high caliber weapons, aka like the 50 cal. The OS-H also saw that the rubber wheels on the return rollers to be replaced for easier manufacturing with more cast steel versions. The hull was also fitted with better support systems for easy removal for the side skirts when they were damaged. The added weight reduced overall speed, and this was not improved upon. It never got fixed, never did, with the end of the war and everything. They also went ahead and changed the transmission to what the Panzer III used, which was even more underpowered, so this just basically degraded the overall quality of the Panzer IV. Now, the last model to be produced during the war was the OS-J. This is considered a step back from the OS-H version. Now, this late war model was meant to replace these tanks more quickly and more effectively because of the heavier and heavier losses that they were generating. The electric generator that powered the tank's turret was removed so that the tank didn't have the hydraulic system anymore, so basically the tank crewmen have to rotate the turret by hand. The pistol and vision ports were also removed, and the engine radiator housing was simplified by changing the slanted sides into straight sides. The side skirts were also later replaced with just wire mesh, and the return rollers were also reduced from 4 to 3 to speed up production. There was attempts to mate a Panther turret onto the body of a Panzer IV, but these attempts showed that there would have been too much stress on the chassis of the tank itself to make it worthwhile. So at this point the chassis was determined to be beyond its limits in both weight and volume, and that no more upgrades can be managed or done to the tank. Overall production of the Panzer IV was at first meant to be limited, but unforeseen events forced the Germans to go ahead and push this tank through into the big leagues. An average of 1,057 Panzer IVs were produced per year for 8 years, and being the only German tank to see production all the way throughout the war. Now, there has been quite a few variants made of the Panzer IV chassis, many of these seen as tank destroyers, and the most famous being the Jag Panzer IV and the Stug IV. They were cheaper and faster to construct than any other tanks, and the main disadvantage that we know of with these tanks is limited tank traverse. There's also anti-aircraft versions made of the chassis, and also self-propelled artillery like the Hummel. All in all, this tank has a very rich history and all that, and very rich combat history along with that. Again, like I said in the beginning of the video, this tank made up the bulk of German armor strength throughout the war. 1 out of 4 of all German tanks that saw combat service were Panzer IVs. With that said, the Panzer IV saw combat across all of Europe and North Africa at every major combat operation. From the invasion of Poland to the Battle of Berlin, the Panzer IV was there. The tank performed within its tasks and even beyond its abilities, and it was one of the most feared German tanks out there, with the ability to make you dead if you underestimated it. It saw combat all over Europe, like I said, and it's one of those tanks that if it wasn't for it and its ease of manufacturing and just simply its overall ability to do everything, make holes in enemy lines, reconnaissance, plug holes, fire brigading, holding down areas of interest, it was one of them tanks that was potentially a main battle tank within its own right, because it did a little bit of everything. Can't say it's a main battle tank because it was limited in what it can do. It couldn't do everything, but it did a pretty damn fine job, and I give my hats off to the crew members, whoever got into a Panzer IV. Talk a little bit about World of Tanks. The Panzer IV is a tier 5 tank. After playing many upon many high tier tanks on a regular basis, I kind of lost touch on judging what a tier 5 tank should be like. But if I compared the firepower to the T-34 video that I did, it does pack a pretty decent punch. It doesn't really have a really extreme high alpha, but it does have a really fast loading gun and good aim time to make that top gun of the 7.5 centimeter pretty decent all to itself. It has more than enough pin to get through flat surfaces like that's seen on the Tiger tank, but not enough to really get through the sloped upper plates of the Panther tank. The gun does wonders against a bunch of low tier tanks because of its very extreme fast reload, so you're able to engage a lot of targets very quickly and effectively. You are more than able to take down larger tanks as long as you're wolf packed up with a whole bunch of other tanks, so it does take a good bit of work and effort to take them down, but it can be done. Now, the armor on the tank is alright. I mean, it's not the greatest, but it's not the best. It does what it does. The turret armor tends to deflect a good fair share of rounds when it doesn't hit any flat surfaces, like kind of like on your sides there. Now, the front turret armor itself, whenever you angle it, does pretty good against a bunch of tier 4 tanks. But when it comes to much larger targets or much larger tanks with bigger guns with like a 122mm main gun, you're gonna be dead meat. So you gotta watch out, use the mobility to get around, but only use that armor when you got to, because you only have so much of it. Now, the mobility on this tank is fair. I mean, it does pretty good getting to A to B at a very quick pace, but it's really hard to make those tight turns when you're at top speed. Turns like a whale, if you guys know what I'm saying. But it does turn on a dime when you're not going very fast or you're in a stationary type position, so it does get the job done. I mean, the mobility isn't the greatest, but you know, it works. I mean, it's a medium tank, so it does get pretty decent speed and, you know, it does what it does, man. You know, what am I supposed to say about mobility? Overall, the Panzer IV is, like I said, a tier 5 tank. Whenever I play it, I manage to get a kill or two, but when you really gotta consider how World of Tanks works and how it does against other tanks or tanks of its lower nature or higher, you gotta understand that whenever you're the top tank of the match, you're going to fare pretty damn well. If you're up against a bunch of tier 6, 7s, or 8s, you tend to be at a very disadvantaged position from the start. A, you don't really have the alpha to really two-shot a bunch of targets or make a bunch of high tier targets afraid of you, and the lacking of pen does work against you whenever you're going up against targets with sloped armor. The fast loading gun does help, but it's not the game changer when it comes to this tank if you really look at it from the bottom line. It's an alright tank to grind through, but it's not worth keeping for the long haul. It's not worth keeping in your garage. At least that's in my eyes. That's how I feel. Don't know how you guys feel. Now I'm at that part of the video where I get to give away some World of Tanks gold. This week I'm going to be giving away, of course, 3,000 gold to the North American server or 2,500 to the European Union server. To win said gold, you must be A, be subscribed to my channel, and B, post a comment down below, maybe about the video question, which is, ask me a question. Any question. I really don't care what questions you guys ask me, just ask me a question. I already hit the milestone of 500,000 views, so I'm really happy for that. So I'm going to go ahead and do a Q&A. You guys post your questions into this video, and my man Dave, or DG Ware, is going to get to these questions, and we'll throw some answers your way. So just go ahead and ask me some questions. I don't care what. I'll see about answering them. So that's me. I'm Pandy. I appreciate you guys watching. Looking forward to your questions, so keep them clean so I can at least say it over a video, you know. Don't want to get in trouble with no law or anything, or the FBI or nothing. You know what I'm saying? Talk to you guys later. Pandy. Good hunting.